Welcome back to the Power of Coffee. This marks the next 10 pages to make it the 90th page of the story. The story is about Martha, who is 21 years old. She's a university graduate but without a job. But fortunately, she gets a job at a coffee house later. The coffee house is run by Betty. So later, Martha becomes the owner of the coffee house because Betty died. So we just finished the part where Betty has just died, okay? The 80th episode where Betty has just died. So now we are going to see what happens after Betty's death. So let's continue the story. I stayed with her and Betty while Belinda rushed outside for help. That is, Martha stayed with Anne and Betty, who is apparently dead, while Belinda went outside to get help. She returned with a group of youth, about 5 men and 2 women. The men carried out Betty, holding her up by her limbs, since there was nothing to place her on. Then the women helped Anne to her feet and gradually walked her out of there. Belinda left with Betty in a taxi, heading for the hospital, while I stayed with Anne and the women. They were speaking with her, trying to calm her down, to calm her down further. I wondered how to get Anne home, since I didn't know where she lived. Then I thought of Selassie. I had her phone number, and she knew where Anne lived. Selassie arrived about 30 minutes later, coming from nearby. I only told her that Anne wasn't feeling well and so needed to go home. So Martha doesn't disclose the possible demise of Betty to Selassie, who is a friend of Selassie's. No, who is a friend of Betty. Okay. So let's take that part again. I wondered how to get Anne home, since I didn't know where she lived. Then I thought of Selassie. I had her phone number, and she knew where Anne lived. Selassie arrived about 30 minutes later, coming from nearby. I told her that Anne wasn't feeling well, and so needed to go home. She nodded and then asked her what was wrong, but Anne didn't respond. The 2 women didn't say anything either, because they knew nothing. Now I was the only one left at the coffee house. Me, together with the rest of the employees. I walked into the dining hall, where I met quite a number of guests, eating and talking in low tones. But it seemed they were all talking about the same thing. The murmuring sounded like screams in my head, though it wasn't loud. I quickly walked out of the place and went to the kitchen. The 2 young women who had been doing the dishes were serving the meals now. They glanced at me as I stood in the doorway. Then I went inside for some water and then asked for some food. Subsequently, I sat down on a chair to eat. I was starving because the food just wasn't. I was starving, but the food wasn't just good for the stomach. It also took my mind off everything I had witnessed within the last hour. I enjoyed the meal so much that I got a second plate. The girls were amused by this, and I smiled at them. But as I ate, I drifted into thought, and gradually my eyes welled up. I sucked the tears through the nostrils, not wanting to break down in the open. The girls began to glance at me, and then they also began murmuring. I quickly finished the meal and then left the room. Automatically, going to the small restroom where Betty had passed. I wanted to be alone, and this was the only place I knew I could be alone. I stood in the doorway and stared inside, recollecting all that had taken place in there. I glanced at the mini couch she had been sitting on, and then my mind went over to the phone. I went inside for it. It was on the table where I had placed it, but it was off, and so I turned it on. It started up, and seconds later it showed the time. It was 4 p.m. now. I left the phone on the table and then sat on the chair I had placed against the door. Then I dried my eyes in my blouse and then leaned backwards in the chair. The breeze was stronger now, and my eyes were beginning to shut. Initially, I fought to keep them open, wiping my face in my blouse several times. Okay, so now Martha has gone back to the room where Betty just passed away because she wants to be alone to process everything that has happened. She went to the room and she found the phone. Okay, you know, when she found that the phone had fallen and dismantled, it was strange, but she didn't want to think much about it. So let's see what happens now. The breeze was stronger now, and my eyes were beginning to shut. Initially, I fought to keep them open, wiping my face in my blouse several times. But after a while, I just gave in because I was tired. Tired of the day's event. Tired of the day's event. When the sleep got stronger, I sat on the floor and placed my head over the seat of the chair. The hospital confirmed what we all knew about Betty. Belinda stood in as her relative and got the autopsy result. Okay, the hospital confirmed what we all knew about Betty. Belinda stood in as her relative and got the autopsy result, which revealed that she had died from a heart attack. Subsequently, she returned to the coffee house and found me where I was, after no one could tell my location. The girls couldn't give her an answer, and neither could the waiters. So she called me up on the phone, and that's when I awoke. I answered it after the second ring, not realizing who it was, since I didn't check the identity of the caller. Hello? Martha. She spoke first, and then I got a voice. I stood up from the floor, wiped my face, and then began to walk out of there. I stood up from the floor, wiped my face, and then began to walk out of there while speaking with her. She asked how I was, and then where I was. I only answered the first one because she met me soon afterward as I approached the dining hall. What happened? Belinda asked me about Betty while we sat at the corner of the dining hall, which had only a handful of patrons. It was nearing 7 p.m. now, about 15 minutes to. I told her what I knew, that Betty came in at 1 p.m. and went to the restroom to relax. I mean, the room for resting. It's not a washroom. It's a room for resting, okay? So I call it the restroom. Okay, so what happened? Belinda asked me about Betty while we sat at the corner of the dining hall, which had only a handful of patrons. It was nearing 7 p.m. now, about 15 minutes to. I told her what I knew, that Betty came in at 1 p.m. and went to the restroom to relax, or the sleep room to relax. She asked for a glass of water, and I delayed in sending it to her because I was waiting outside for Belinda. When Belinda heard about the delay, She got a little bit angry and insinuated that the delay is what may have caused the heart attack. I shook my head and gently told her about the dismantled phone. I found the phone on the floor. It was lying next to her, and I picked it up and arranged it. I said. Belinda glanced at me, bearing a slight frown on her face. I think she got a call from someone and dropped the phone. I think she got a call from someone and dropped the phone. Maybe it was some bad news. I added in a soft tone. Belinda stared at me, thinking about the possibility. Did you check the number that called her? She said after some moments. No, I haven't checked the phone. I replied. We have to check the phone. Maybe you're right, she said, and then got up and casually walked away. I followed her into the restroom, and soon we had a number from the call log. It was a foreign number that began with a country code for Canada. Belinda dialed it up, and it rang after some moment, yet no one answered it. Subsequently, she tried again, and again it went unanswered. That was the only number in the call log. Belinda left the phone and asked me to try calling again later. I left the coffee house at 8 o'clock after helping to clear the place. Belinda informed me and the others available that there will be no business tomorrow. Belinda informed me and the others available that there will be no business tomorrow, and she asked them to tell their colleagues. I took Betty's phone with me home, and I placed it on a silent mode, in case someone called late in the night. When I got home, I met no one since Mom was taking a shower and Dad was probably asleep or listening to the radio, as he usually did. When I got home, I met no one since Mom was taking a shower and Dad was probably sleeping or listening to the radio, as he usually did. That was a relief, because I was in no mood to talk. I wasn't sober, neither did I look sad. I only felt fatigue and headache. I dropped my hand back on the floor on entering my room and then placed the phone on the table in there. Then I undressed and then lay over the bed on my belly. Okay, so I wasn't sober, neither did I look sad. I only felt fatigue and headache. I dropped my hand back on the floor on entering my room and then placed the phone on the table in there. Then I undressed and lay over the bed on my belly. There was no shower that evening. I may have locked my room subconsciously. There was no shower that evening. So Martha didn't take a bath that evening because of everything she was feeling. I may have locked my room subconsciously because Mom told me it was locked and I didn't open up after she had knocked over it many times. She told Dad about it, that Martha had locked herself up and didn't want to open the door. According to her, Father kicked the door open and they found me lying asleep with no signs of pretense. Mother sat by me for some time before leaving. She tapped me on the arm and I awoke after the third time. She tapped me on the arm and I awoke after the third time. She smiled and asked how I was. "Hello, Martha. Are you okay?" she said, speaking in vernacular, which was the way we all communicated at home. "Yes, I'm fine," I softly replied, and then sat up. "Why did you lock the door?" She said, "Consent." I looked at her, uncertain of what she was saying, since I did not remember locking the door. "I didn't lock the door," I confidently remarked. "You didn't, but it was locked," she said, looking at me, trying to get the truth. "Maybe I did, but I don't remember," I said, in thought, and then got up from the bed and put on a dress. Mother waited and left with me to the kitchen, where I ate in hunger. She sat by watching me, and after I finished the plate, she asked, "Martha, are you all right? Why did you wait to get so hungry before eating?" I glanced at her and then smiled a little, and then got up to wash the plate. I glanced at her and then smiled a little, and then got up to wash the plate. "How is Madam Betty? Have you been hearing from her?" That was sudden, and it made me stop washing. "She's fine," I quietly replied after a minute. I quietly replied after a minute. "I see," Mother remarked, and then after some moments she continued. "Did you see her recently?" "No. Yes, she came to the coffee shop yesterday," I said in a casual tone. "All right. Good night," she concluded, and I replied likewise. I finished the plate, drank some water, and then got into the shower. Okay, so this is the day that Martha came home after Betty's demise. She didn't want to take a shower, okay? So she went to her room and she locked up the door, okay? But her mother came to knock on the door, and when she didn't open, she called her father to kick down the door, okay, open. And after waking her up, after tapping her for 3 times, Martha awakes on the third tap. She takes her to the kitchen and she eats, okay? She eats a lot because she's starving. After eating, her mother leaves her and she goes to have a shower afterward. So that's where we are now. "All right, good night," she concluded, and I replied likewise. I finished the plate, drank some water, and then got into the shower. I spent all the time there trying to rid my mind of the headache and perhaps forget the memories of the day. Betty was on my mind, but it didn't make me sad, because I couldn't think of her as someone in the past. I had a long and satisfying sleep. Waking up at 10:30 the next morning, I had a long and satisfying sleep. Waking up at 10:30 the next morning, Mother was at my bedside when I opened my eyes. She wanted to know why I overslept, despite having a job to do. I told her that we were on break. It wasn't me. Sorry. I told her that we were on break. It wasn't me going on leave. It was the business itself taking a break. "Why?" she asked, and I began to think of something. "We've run out of some supplies, that's why," I casually said. She nodded and subsequently left. I sat on the bed for some time before leaving. I thought of what had happened yesterday, and then my mind shifted to Lamley. I began to wonder how we were going to break the news to her, how difficult that was going to be. Then I glanced at the phone on the table. I went over to check if there had been a call, since it was on silent mode. There was nothing. On instinct, I dialed up the number again, and it rang. It rang, and then there was a voice at the end. "Hello, Lumley's phone?" It was a woman, a white woman, I guess. I perceived, because of the accent. "Hello, hello," I called out, first in a soft tone and then louder. "Hello, Lumley's phone, who is this?" she said, and I could hear her better now. Martha, my name is Martha. Where is Lamley, please? I tried to sound confident, as I was a little nervous, speaking to someone who spoke differently. Martha, my name is Dana Westfield. I'm the administrator of St. James Specialist Hospital, she said, and I smiled. We could finally connect with Lamley. She said, and I smiled. We could finally connect with Lamley. Okay, where is Lamley, please? I'm her friend, I said, and then it took some moment before she spoke again. Martha, I'm sorry to say this. Lamley had an accident. She hit her head and went into coma. I'm sorry. She didn't make it. I was quiet, naturally. Was this real? I questioned my mind. I shook my head. Breathed in, exhaled, and then breathed in again. And then I said, Lamley had an accident? Where? What kind of accident? The woman took some moment to answer. It seemed as though she was holding back the full story, releasing it in bits, so I could process it as it came. Yes, she had an accident. I'm sorry, she said, and then seconds after that, the line beeped and the call ended. I put down the phone and then sat on the bed to think. How was it possible? How was it possible that both Betty and her daughter were gone in an instant? I was right, I thought, when I said Betty might have received bad news, causing the heart attack. Now what? Betty was gone, her daughter was gone. How was I going to break the news? Mother came in suddenly, and I immediately stood up from the bed and pretended to be laying it.